city can't go into an arena as a money-losing proposition. Is the way I think about it, to summarize it. And so that I think is the challenge of I-91, and it's a fair position for the people to take, I believe, because we do face very difficult economic and budget times, and we have to make sure that we're making the most out of our tax dollars.
Seattle Mayor Mike McGinn, he was on with me right after the news conference 1 week ago today. Seattle Arena Proposal Roundtable continues. Ian Furness with you. Brian Robinson is here. Our Thiel's here. Jason Reid and Adam Brown from Sonicsgate. Eddie Francis from KUBE 93. Morning show down the hall, the #1 hip-hop station in Seattle. And they've been talking about this down the hall as well. And then joining us on the phone right now, look, if we're going to truly have a roundtable, we need to have all opinions and welcome all opinions, and we do that right now. And we're happy to have Chris Van Dyke from Citizens for More Important Things joining us on the Zeke's Pizza Hotline. Chris, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having me. It's always good to be here.
I appreciate you coming on. Let's just get your initial reaction to the news conference 1 week ago with Al Constantine and Mayor Mike McGinn, and we'll kind of start there. Go ahead.
Oh, hey, my initial reaction was really, really positive. It was like, wow, this sounds really great, and I don't think anybody's going to be screaming at me.
What made this good in your eyes?
Well, it looked on the statement that I heard, and I got pretty not the greatest of ears, and a pretty thick head too. But what I heard was no public involvement or no public guarantee or words to that effect or that implication. And so with that and in the initial news release, I was really kind of jumping for joy, and Brian there knows I can jump for joy as good as anybody. And it wasn't until I read the term sheet that they put out along with the press release where it talked about a cap of $200 million on the public involvement, and all of a sudden I kind of went, well, wait a minute, how come we need a cap if we don't have any involvement? Started to look at the details, and then, to be honest, I'm still pretty excited from the point of view of one who, as I've told Brian privately any number of times, we really are not sticks in the mud. We just, as Mayor McGinn said, we just wanted to make sure that the public got a return too, as long as everybody's throwing money around, and so it's just put some numbers in the press release, or put some numbers in the term sheet, and the term sheet talks in very general principles, but put some numbers in the term sheet, and there's a good chance that the numbers could crunch, and it would indeed meet the terms of I-91, and we'll be the first to say that it does. I mean, I think that's a great thing. So,
well, Chris, let me throw something at you, and then I want to have Brian, Art, and everybody else go ahead and react to this, because it's a common email or text that we've been getting in terms of negative feedback here at our radio station. Obviously, here we're a sports station. We're all jumping up and down, and we're not worried about fiscal responsibility. We're worried about getting the NBA and or the NHL back to town. That's better for our business. I'll be very honest with you. That's where we're at right now. But
if you're dealing with professional sports, fiscal responsibility, that's for eggheads.
That's exactly why we don't need that. We just want teams to talk about. That's all we're talking about. But let me throw this at you, because I think a lot of people, and this is the negative comments, or I guess the hard questions that people want answered. And Chris, we'll start with you, and again we'll go around the horn. We heard, and Mayor McGinn told me right after the news conference, which he said the same thing in the news conference. No public money, no public funds. Yet there are bonds that need to be backed by the city and or county, and there are taxes that would come from the arena itself. So how does that make sense, and can you live with that in terms of I-91 and just overall with the fact that there would be taxes for the arena, on the arena itself and tickets, and there would be public-backed bonds?
Let me. I'm going to try and talk a little slowly, and I'm going to try and lay it out as I see it. And Brian, you and I have had this discussion, so please interrupt me if I'm not repeating myself correctly, or if you think I get it wrong. Okay. there's a fundamental difference between a revenue bond and a general obligation bond. Somebody's going to have to float bonds for $200 million, just on the very general nature of the term sheet that was put out. If those are general obligation bonds, and somebody's going to have to pay off those bonds, okay, with some source of revenue from somewhere.
You're going to lose the audience, Chris. You asked me to jump in. Way too technical, man. Way too technical.
If it's a general obligation bond, the full faith and credit of the city is pledged to pay them off. So I-91 would come into play, and we would have to make sure that for under the terms of I-91, that for the risk taken or the money pledged, that there was a sufficient guaranteed return on investment to meet the terms of I-91. If, on the other hand, it's a revenue bond, and the city's full faith and credit is pledged, it's revenue generated by the facility. In my mind, and this is that's fair game for you guys. You take the parking revenue, take all the revenue, take anything that you can get out of the facility, fleece those fans for whatever you guys will fork over to pay the bonds. We do have a very legitimate current of opinion, if you will, in Citizens for More Important Things, that every business out there pays some taxes to support the general common good. And we could argue that, but that's not what I-91 said. I-91 said the city just has to come out ahead, cash on cash on the deal. And so if these are, and I won't stutter anymore, if these are revenue bonds, there's just a tremendous amount of flexibility.
And is it, Brian? Are these revenue bonds we're talking about?
I'm not going to answer bonding questions. I think that's up to the city. There's two things I know about this.
It hasn't been decided, right?
I don't think it's been decided. But Chris, one thing I know that has been decided is this term sheet that was put forward specifically states that it must be I-91 compliant.
Yeah.
And therefore it's going to be legally binding. I think that the concern you have about risk is people are looking at this, they're saying, well, there's $200 million in taxpayer-issued bonds of some kind. How do we know they will get paid back? And I know that Pete Holmes, our city attorney, is working really hard on making sure there's language there that protects the public and makes sure that if they say they're going to repay the bonds, that they're obligated and that there's no way to weasel out. So, granted, given that it says it will be I-91 compliant, I think that talking about guarantees and risk and those things that kind of ups the bar a little bit. And I don't.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying, Brian, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, if the duck is I-91 and I-91 compliance, it's I-91 compliant. I think, and the thing I'm excited about is I think the mayor, as expressed and in the term sheet, and the language is right there, for it to be I-91 compliant, anybody can stand up and say, no, it's not. Well, then you got to make a cogent argument that it's not.
All right, let me do this. I'm pushing a break, but I don't want to let Chris go before. Does anybody have a question for Chris, Jason, Eddie? Anybody have a question? Puck, yes?
Well, I guess maybe this is a question for Chris and Brian. What would prevent the city and the county of not just doing the revenue bond? I mean, what's the discussion between the revenue and then the other type of bond?
A revenue. I'll answer that one, Brian. A revenue bond is going because it doesn't have the guarantee of the taxing ability of the city to pay it off. It's revenue driven. It's going to carry a higher interest rate. They might have to pay a little bit more money for it.
So your debt load's going to be higher every year.
I can tell you we are expecting a much more detailed analysis of this bonding issue and what it's going to be to come out relatively soon that can kind of explain it. Until that all comes out, we're just going to lose people talking about it.
Perfect. All right.
Brian's exactly right. It's just, but the good thing, and I think Brian, you'll agree, I hope you would agree with me with this. We're not looking at this deal trying to figure out a way to shoot it down. All we want to do is make sure it's I-91.
And that puts and Chris, that puts smiles on everybody's face because that's, I think, obviously one big roadblock. People were wondering if that would exist, but I appreciate you coming on today. I have a feeling we'll talk again in the next few months, but I do appreciate you coming on. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
There you go. That's Chris Van Dyke, Citizen for More Important Things. Quick check of traffic. We'll come back, react a little bit to that, and then we'll talk about the teams themselves. And Brian and we've all kind of scratched the surface on this, but I think a lot of people were thinking, hey, the Kings and Coyotes in 2012 in the fall will be playing in Seattle. Now it looks like neither will be doing that. What about next year? What about the Hornets? Where are we in this process? How close could we be? We haven't even talked about traffic mitigation, but I don't want to lose everybody.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Stay away from traffic mitigation.
No. Don't
right?
do that. Don't do that.
All right, we'll stay away from that. We'll talk about when we might actually see a shovel in the ground, what teams could be in play, and are we being used? You feel dirty? We'll talk about it next.